Welcome to this session this morning. Our theme now is global education in Asia and Pacific region. My name is Elina Lehtomäki and I will be chairing this session. And I would like to welcome our first presenter, Karina Menzie-Ballantyne from the CQUniversity of Australia. You're welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting me today. I would like to firstly pay my respects to the traditional owners of the lands on which we are all meeting and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and future. I thought I would put this slide on as my first as I introduce myself, because this is literally the scene from my window as I was creating my PowerPoint in my office today. So I thought, well, you can't get much more Australian than having a family of kangaroos sitting outside of your office window. And that is my presentation today, is to look at the way in which global education has been developing and is occurring now in the Australian context. Firstly, to perhaps give a little bit of context to the Australian setup in terms of education, we do have a national curriculum here in Australia, but the way in which the states federated initially gave the control for education to the individual states. So we have a situation whereby the federal organisation and an organisation called the Australian Curriculum Authority actually develops and reviews and presents a national curriculum. But each of the states can then take that curriculum and develop it in their own way. And it is up to the individual states to decide how to resource it, how to train their teachers, and how to assess it. So we have a bit of a situation between the national and the state agendas sometimes, and that I wanted to give some context because that is one of the things that is currently influencing what is happening with global education or education for global citizenship or global competence, which is some of the many terms that are being used here. There is definitely aspirational documents here in Australia that include mention of global citizenship and the need to develop and graduate students who will be confident members of their global communities. Each 10 years, our federal minister and our state ministers for education gather together to develop a declaration on the goals for young Australians. Our previous declaration was the Melbourne Declaration that went from 1999 to 2019. And as you can see, goal 2 of that particular declaration stated that they wanted active and informed citizens. And under that goal, there was a dot point specifically related to responsible global and local citizens. The newer version is the Mahatma, which is the Aboriginal word for Alice Springs Declaration. And you'll see that that same indication of a goal has come through into the new declaration, although it is interesting that the change of language has gone from citizens to active and informed members of the community. And I'll talk about the political situation in a moment, because this is one of the influences that this has happened under 2 different governments. There is also some considerations and some conversations around whether citizen is an inclusive enough word compared to community member. Now, in Australia, we have, as I say, a national curriculum. This curriculum goes from foundation, or prep as it is sometimes called, up to year 10. And this curriculum is a 3-dimensional curriculum. So it consists of 8 learning areas. The humanities and social sciences then divided it into 4 strands. But in addition to this, we have 3 cross-curricular priorities. The first of these is focusing on our own First Nations people, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures. The second I always think of is thinking about our neighbours, which is Asia and Australia's engagement with Asia. And the third is looking at our global situation in terms of sustainability. These cross-curricular priorities are supposed to embed knowledge across the key learning areas. So they are not subjects in themselves. They're expected to be incorporated into the key learning areas where appropriate. In addition, we have 7 general capabilities. And these general capabilities are considered the 21st century skills. The first 3 you will see are literacy, numeracy, and ICTs, which are considered the foundational skills that every student needs. But I always think that the other 4 general capabilities is really where global education, global citizenship sits. Critical and creative thinking, personal and social capability, which is very much about rights and responsibilities and collaboration, intercultural understanding, and ethical understanding. As mentioned, that curriculum goes from foundation to year 10. But the theme of these general capabilities or 21st century skills is continued into our senior years curriculum. And as you can see there, we're talking again about critical and creative thinking, the ability to communicate, to collaborate, those personal and social skills, or in some ways the social emotional skills that we might sometimes have referred to as the soft skills, and the ICT skills as well. So you can see that on paper, we have quite a commitment to global competence, global citizenship, and to developing the knowledge, skills, values, and attitudes that the students need to engage effectively as members of their local and global community. But we know always that what is on paper and what happens at the end point in the classroom doesn't always connect. So I wanted to have a little look here about the sort of professional development that has been happening over the last couple of decades in order to assist teachers to teach in this 3-dimensional way in which the curriculum has been written. One of the difficulties was when they rolled out the curriculum in 2014, they actually rolled it out subject by subject. So it never really was launched in the 3-dimensional way in which it was written, although that is being looked at the moment, and I'll mention that in a moment. It was interesting to note, I attended a session that Doug Massimiliano was presenting for Bridge yesterday, that they mentioned that a lot of the work in education for global citizenship, global education, started in the non-government organizations or the not-for-profit organizations. And that's very much what happened here in Australia as well. We had for many years a project called the Global Education Project. And that project was interestingly funded through the Department of Foreign Affairs, through AusAid. And it was, if you like, initially branded as development education. And that was rolled out across Australia through not-for-profit organisations. There was a not-for-profit in each state who was responsible and funded for running professional development for in-service and pre-service teachers to assist them in embedding global perspectives in their curriculum and pedagogy. I just wanted to put a little boasting note in there that they always used to tell us that the funding for that particular project was the same funding for the cleaners of the Department of Foreign Affairs building in Canberra. So on that very limited budget, when the project was wound up, we had actually that year trained 27,000 pre-service and in-service teachers right across Australia. However, as often happens, that particular project, as soon as our current Liberal national government came into play, the funding for AusAid was cut, and our project, although it was such a very small budget, went with it. There was then a little bit of a quiet period. The funding for this was cut about 6-7 years ago. And there has been quite a quiet period in terms of professional development in this space until recently. An interesting thing to note, and maybe it is because sometimes we still see ourselves as a very young country, and there is a little bit of, sometimes I think, of a cultural cringe that we think we need to compare ourselves all the time to other more established countries to ensure that we are up there with them and that we are playing on the same playing field. So because of this, PISA assessments actually play quite a large role in Australian educational policy development. And when the PISA results come out for literacy and numeracy and science over the last few decades, it makes national news across the country as to where Australia sits in those rankings. So it is interesting to note that a couple of new developments are happening in professional development in response to the new PISA assessment. And my colleague Miriam Ham and I have been working with the state government and also the Catholic Education Commission and a not-for-profit in running some professional development in global competence for teachers across the state of Queensland. I will be presenting a paper on that later on this morning for you. So where to from here? Just to wrap up, the Australian curriculum is currently under review. And one of the things that is giving us heart is in reviewing the curriculum, they are definitely saying and emphasising the 3 dimensions. But one of our concerns is that they are being a little bit patriarchal in their approach, in that they are saying, the language is saying that we will embed the cross-curricular priorities and we will embed the general capabilities, and that so that the teachers don't have to worry about this and that they will be incorporated. And we feel that that's a little bit concerning language, because we feel like teachers should have the autonomy to identify themselves where these really important components of global education sit, rather than it being dictated. So thank you very much for listening to me. Here are my contact details, should anyone be interested to hear more about the Australian context.
Thank you, Karina. And we are moving to our next presentation. Yoko Mochizuki, you're welcome.
My name is Yoko Mochizuki. I'm a head of policy at UNESCO MJP, Mahatma Gandhi Institute of Education for Peace and Sustainable Development. We are based in New Delhi, India, and we are the newest UNESCO Category 1 institute and an integral part of UNESCO education sector. And we have a focus on social emotional learning and digital pedagogies for SDG 4. So today I'd like to talk a little bit about our activities. So our focus is not only on global citizenship education, but we work at the intersection of education for sustainable development, global citizenship, education, and peace education. Peace and human rights education, and we are the only Category 1 institute of UNESCO in the Asia Pacific region, but our mandate is global. And as I said, our primary focus is to mainstream social emotional learning and the use of digital technologies to transform education systems to achieve more sustainable and peaceful societies. And I don't have time to cover everything we do, but I like to refer to some activities that might be of interest to you. So we also have a strong focus on youth, change makers, and we also work in the area of what is known as PVE, Prevention of Violent Extremism through Education, which UNESCO is undertaking as part of the SDG 4.7 mandate. And for example, we worked with young people to develop youth-led guide on prevention of violent extremism, which you can see on the upper right-hand side in this slide. And currently we are running something called Kindness Matters campaign, and we have collected 100,000 stories from not just young people, but from stakeholders all over the world. And this movement is partly led by young people themselves. We created a Global Youth Alliance for Kindness, and together with them and a number of civil society organizations committed to the kindness movement, we are trying to establish an International Day of Kindness through the UNESCO process this year. I'm heading a policy team at UNESCO MJP. And for example, this report, Rethinking Schooling, that came out in 2017, we looked at curriculum and policy documents from 22 Asian countries to measure the extent to which ESD and global citizenship education concepts and competencies are embedded in the current policy and curriculum in these countries. And we had experts from all these 22 countries and coded original documents. And we, for example, we have about 20,000 excerpts coded using the coding scheme we developed. And I think some of you might be aware of UNESCO seminar reports to envision the futures of education. The first one, 1972 report, is known for mainstreaming the concept of lifelong learning. And the 96 Delors report, it defined the famous 4 pillars of education: learning to know, learning to do, learning to be, learning to live together. And in 2015, when the SDGs were adapted, UNESCO also published a small publication called Rethinking Education. And MJP reports, many of them are titled as like Rethinking Schooling, Rethinking Pedagogy, or Rethinking Learning, inspired by this report. And this year at the UNESCO General Conference in November, the International Commission on the Futures of Education, convened by UNESCO's Director General, this independent commission will be releasing a report called Learning to Become. And in this context, so MJP works a lot on advancing science policy practice nexus. So the 2017 report, Rethinking Schooling, and in 2019, we launched a report called Rethinking Pedagogy. This report is to explore the potential of digital technology in achieving SDG 4. And 2020, last year, we came out with a report called Rethinking Learning. This is focusing on, this is the thematic review of social and emotional learning. And as our contribution to UNESCO's Futures of Education initiative, now we are conducting a large-scale assessment. Here, assessment, I don't mean learning assessment, but massive scale literature review exercise to assess the state of knowledge on education. So this has been inspired by Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, which was undertaken under Kofi Annan, and also IPCC assessment reports. So what we are trying to do is to do what IPCC reports does on the assessing the state of knowledge on climate change, mobilizing thousands of scientists. We are mobilizing multidisciplinary experts working on education reforms and learning, and producing a report to assess the state of knowledge on education. And this will be MJIP's concrete contribution to the Futures of Education initiative. So we are currently working with about 100 authors, and we have 50 peer reviewers from over 45 countries. And we have 4 working groups in this exercise. The first one is focusing on the purpose of education, human flourishing. The second one is focusing on the context of education, including global environmental change, conflicts, and political economy, and all these important contextual factors. And the third working group is focusing on learning experience. And these chapters are primarily written by cognitive scientists and neuroscientists and psychologists. And the fourth working group is looking at data and evidence. And so these 4 working groups, and we have 25 chapters in total. And we are planning to launch the summary for decision makers of the IC assessment report at the UNESCO General Conference in Paris this winter, around November, when the Futures of Education report is launched. But the actual volume we plan to launch early next year. Lastly, I wanted to draw your attention to the Global Collective for Social-Emotional Learning and Digital Learning we launched in 2019. It was actually before COVID-19 pandemic hit the world, but we feel that the mandate of this Global Collective is even more urgent and relevant today in the current context. So basically, we have 6 governments officially part of this collective. We have South Africa, Japan, Kyrgyzstan, Quebec from Canada, and Sri Lanka and Maldives as official members. And we would be happy to have more government members, as well as we also have 22 non-governmental members. So if you're interested, please get in touch with me, and I'll be happy to share more information on this collective. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Yoko, very much. And we unfortunately have to move on. And our next presenters are Professor Teng Jung from Beijing Normal University and Yuxuan Gong from State University of New York at Albany. You're welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon. And I'm not sure whether there's anyone that I should say good evening. That's a very special experience during the pandemic time. So I'm very happy to share our very primary and very initial thinking about the global competence in China. And I'm Jun from the Institute of International Comparative Education from Beijing Normal University. And first, I'd like to say global competency is really very hot topic, not just in US, in Australia, in Japan, in Korea, but also it's a very big issue in China too. So first, I'd like to show you some policies. Last year, the Chinese government just issued a new policies talking about the opinions of the Ministry of Education and the other, ministries talking about how to open up for the education. And in this documents, policies, they emphasize the importance of preparing students with the global competence. It's quite important. And also not just this one, but also a lot of, other policies in terms of like our every 5 years planning also emphasize the importance to prepare the students for the future global world. And we emphasize a lot from the moral, intellectual, physical, and other, different aspects to prepare our students. And also, as you might have already been quite familiar about our president, she also mentioned in many conference that it's very important for us to establish the common faith in shared community. So from these policies, you can see global competency is really very important topic, not just in the field of from the government perspective, but also for the academic. A lot of researchers definitely, including me, you can tell that from these slides. I wrote a lot of paper talking about the importance of global competence in China. And also there are a lot of other scholars mentioned that. And we are not just talking about it. And the fact is that we are also practicing in the local school. We have a lot of lab school to prepare students with global competence in Beijing, in Shanghai, in Guangzhou, in Chengdu, a lot of different cities, as well as even some rural areas. And but during our thinking, as well as the practice, especially after OECD released that global competence model 2018, it's a very good model. I like it very much. But also I strongly feel that it's quite necessary, because although this model is very good, but when we are applying that into the practice from the local culture, we still feel there is a kind of gap, because the teachers and students keep asking, who's global and what kind of global should it be? And the lucky issue is, I think most of you know her, the Veronica. She's from the Project Zero, Harvard University. She also did some lab in Chinese school several years ago and published her papers last year. And she mentioned that in Chinese school, when we are preparing students with global competence, he even changed this model. And it's very easy for you to identify that he changed the central part of the model from just understanding the word to cultivate oneself to and understanding the word. It's very good that Veronica noticed the special culture or the culture foundation of China in Chinese society. How should we rethinking how to restructure the global competence in China, and not just the self-cultivation is very important. And you know what? Actually, in the realities, there are a lot of much more issues. More than the US and Australia. Although I agree with your opinion, a lot of opinion echoes with my opinion too. But still, a lot of realities and a lot of challenges in other countries you might not facing these challenges. So we start to thinking how to restructure this model in China. And luckily, we found a very, good model to explain that. So now I would like to give my floor to Dr. Gong to explain what we very initial work, what we primarily found in our research.
This word actually is from Professor Teng Jun, and I translate a little bit to this. And we're trying to find a model that can be adapted to China and also related to global competencies. And we would like to present the indicators today. For many years, we have been thinking that student-centered, child-centered pedagogy is taken for granted. However, a paper from Comparative Education Review 2021 by Komatz indicated that the country committed to student-centered learning tend to be dominated by ontological individualism, and then show a range of social and environmental sustainability indices. In the meanwhile, we couldn't simply just categorize anything not student-centered learning as teacher-centered learning. Against this backdrop, Komatz proposed a contingent pedagogy, and this in China can be interpreted into the ancient phrase as competence-based, situation-based, individual-based, and benevolence-based instructing system. And all this can be grouped together so that we created a name of rationale relation education. This merge neoliberalism and moral pedagogy into a new term, rationale relation, and this term is from Zhao Dingyang, 2015. It is different from the economic rationale because it is much more included interconnectedness relation, including human, man-made system, and nature, even including the past, present, future, time, continuity, and change. Since to be a human being, live peacefully on this planet, we are in different layers of relation. Actually, it's rationale relation. To be specific in human relation, by Fei Xiaotong, he mentioned the relation structure in China is diversity orderly structure that is in contrast to the group structure of the modern Western society. To understand this, we can imagine a ripple, like a ripple, and in the middle stand is self with strong ties, and then family, and then acquaintance, and then strangers, and the ties become weaker and weaker. In the long history of Chinese society and the culture which combined Confucius, Taoism, Buddhism together, and Zhai conclude that comma to explain why questions, such as why I have the different result by doing the same thing. Perfect human relation indicated that how to tackle the issue. If I was Jesus, for example, what would Jesus do? And feeling of human beings was used to answer what questions, such as what's the relation in this situation now between me and Professor Tenjing and all the participants. This is a trinity system working together, and some teachers can apply them simultaneously together for 3 together, but some can only apply 1 or 2. In addition, Professor Bian developed the Guanxi sociology, is relation sociology for 10 years in the sociology area, but mainly focused on the capital forms of social capital. However, to have a balanced self in a rationale relation does not only mean social relation, but also it is a form of embodied cultural capital. So it's one form of cultural capital as well. It is not only a moral aspect, since for the out form, it is manners, but its internal form, it is benevolence for the rationale relation. Besides, benevolence, this Chinese character in Chinese itself has 2 characters. It's 2 persons together, and its core meaning contains relation, guanxi inside.
Next, I would like to invite Hyun from Asia Pacific Center of Education for International Understanding.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. Let me start by introducing the institution that I'm working with, APCIEU, Asia Pacific Center of Education for International Understanding. This is related to my presentation's focus on Korea. The center is a UNESCO Category 2 center established by the agreement between the government of Korea and UNESCO in the year 2000. And our mission is to support and cooperate with Asia Pacific countries in the promotion of education for international understanding and also global citizenship towards cultures of peace. And we are located in Seoul, Korea. So this is one of the reasons why I decided to focus on Korea. Well, there's another reason why I chose Korea. Korea hosted, as you may know, the World Education Forum in 2015. And Korea played an active role in including Global Citizenship Education, GCED, in the outcome documents of this forum, Incheon Declaration and Framework for Action for the Implementation of Sustainable Development Goal 4. And later, of course, in SDG 4 itself. Since then, Korea has been advocating GCED in the implementation international community through various actions, such as initiating the Group of Friends for Solidarity and Inclusion with GCED at UNESCO last year. Now let's look at how Korea is doing internally. And for this, I will focus on curriculum. The current curriculum being practiced in Korea is the one that was revised in 2015. And Korean government is now working on the next revision, and the revised curriculum, this next revised curriculum will be announced in, next year. The current curriculum, the 2015 curriculum of Korea has some interesting features. One is the introduction of competencies, self-management, and knowledge and information utilization skills, creative thinking skills, aesthetic, emotional competency, meaning that students should have some cultural sensibilities and empathy and communication skills. And the last one is important, civic competency to actively participate in the development of local, national, and global communities with values and attitudes required of members of these communities. So here, the curriculum, the national curriculum of Korea has some emphasis on global community. The national curriculum of Korea also states that its objective is to foster creative and interdisciplinary talents for future society. And the curriculum is focused on customizing learning for individual students, improving the quality of learning, reinforcing learner-centered education, strengthening process-based assessment, and enhancing coherence. So we can see the current curriculum of Korea is focusing on competency-based education, learner-centered education, and process-based evaluation. Now, you may say that strong emphasis is placed on GCED in the curriculum of Korea, but yeah, we can see some evidence here. One of the goals of upper secondary school education is to develop qualities and attitudes of democratic citizen communicating with the world. And such themes as multicultural society, ethics for global citizens, ethics of coexistence and peace, globalization, global citizen, and sustainable society are included in social studies and moral education and other subjects. But as always, there must be some gap between policy and practice. And one way of measuring this gap is to see the content of textbooks. So recently, APCIEU, our center, reviewed textbooks in social studies and moral education developed in accordance with the national curriculum of 2015. And we have found that the solutions to the problems of globalization are explained as correct answers, rather than encouraging students to develop attitudes and qualities. The textbooks directly show what is the right attitude. So as dry and dull knowledge is provided as the correct answer, there is little room for students to develop abilities for creative and critical thinking, problem solving, and practical use of information. Numerous global issues are displayed, but students can hardly accept them as their own problems, which gives little motivation for inquiry. Lastly, this is some positive side to the Korean efforts to promote GCED. Ministry of Education Korea has since 2015 implemented the GCED Teachers Program. It aims to provide capacity development training for teachers and support their study group activities. Each year, about 300 teachers participate in the training workshops, and they are supposed to play a lead role in their schools and local communities. Our center conducted a survey on GCED teachers' awareness and motivation. Through the program, GCED teachers have gained better understanding of GCED, strengthened capacity for practicing GCED, and enhanced motivation for GCED. The program has also helped the teachers establish networking among themselves and share their teaching experiences. But it has been found that most GCED teachers are those who had already been interested in GCED. So the challenge is to spread or expand GCED to other teachers who may not be interested in GCED. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. 4 very interesting presentations today on global education in Asia and Pacific region, including both activities, policy level activities, as well as research on the ground, and also on the approaches applied in the Asia Pacific region when it comes to global education and learning. I would like to thank you all for presentation themes and also the presenters, because I think we had a good opportunity to learn a lot what happens in the region, what kind of research is going on, what policy level activities are going on, as well as what is provided when it comes to teachers and teacher education and professional development. Thank you. See you soon.